had some trouble the last couple of weeks, so we couldn't quite get them going. But this time, hopefully, we can get the episode of Meta Musings up and going for you guys. I'm here once again with Sotere. Hi, Sotere. How you doing?
I am doing wonderful. As we've mentioned, I'm very hot. Very hot day over here in sunny Southern California, the site of the upcoming Season 2 World Finals. Very exciting, very exciting. Brian and I are going to be like room buddies for a while, right? For like
Yeah.
3 nights during the finals. So
Yep.
yes, I'm excited about everything in life.
Yeah, I'm actually right here at I'm actually at UCLA right now, so I'm right nearby Riot, and Sochi's gonna be coming up. We're gonna go and see these finals and hopefully have a great time. So one of the things that maybe we'll see is an unusual support, which we always start out this show with, and as you can tell, we are going to go with support Zyra. And so, what can you tell us about support Zyra, Soter?
Support Zyra is awesome. She's the new wave of supports. Now, I think we should probably, talk about our supports in the sense that they are kind of fringe champions. We don't pick ones that are, tend to be used. Like Jace, for instance, has been picked up. Fiddlesticks has been played before. Nunu and all the other common ones we don't tend to bring up. But Zyra is a champion who, you probably wouldn't expect to see her in that support role because she tends to be in that AP role and do a very good job at it. But she does bring a lot to the table regardless of how well she scales with AP and regardless of her items. And namely, she has Grasping Roots, which is an AoE snare. I mean, it's not an AoE as much as it is a line snare, but it certainly is a great tool to use. If you level it up, it goes up to 1 3/4 second root, and it has ridiculous range, 1100. So that is, the primary thing she brings. Did you want to chime in as to some of the other things she could bring during the laning phase?
She has also her ultimate, which does have a knockup, and it is on a delay, but it has a pretty big area. So if you have a team fight that breaks out in a certain area and you just drop it down, the enemy team is now forced to, maybe they want to keep on fighting, or if they want to just move out of the area. So it provides really good CC, even if you don't make them or if you don't knock them up, you can force them to try to move out of the area and make them waste time without dealing damage to you. So that is good CC. As Sotir mentioned, she does have that Grasping Roots, and that can get multiple people. So that's pretty important because, I mean, for example, somebody like Morgana might have a good snare, but it doesn't get multiple people. And if you can get maybe like 3 people in your Grasping Roots, that could be huge for a team fight. And she also has good damages in lane and has those seeds that she can put down on the ground, which can act as little wards. I mean, they're not exactly the equivalent of wards. They don't have the same range for sight, but if you want to just check the other bush really quickly without having to drop a ward, you can put a seed down, stuff like that.
Yeah, and she also has 575 auto attack range, which is really nice in the bottom lane, being able to poke people out. Most of the supports tend to have shorter range. Janna, for instance, I think she has like 450 perhaps, 475 maybe. Regardless, it is very nice to be able to just use your auto attacks, keep on poking down there. As we've mentioned, her base damage is really high, and we haven't even, brought to light the fact that her plants can, be used as a zoning tool, and they also, cause consistent slowing, or rather the one of her plants, the Grasping Roots plants, cause a constant slow whenever people are in range and do really good damage. So whether or not you're building AP, she's certainly going to be a force to be reckoned with early on in lane. And that brings that CC towards the late game. And my favorite part of her, of course, is her passive, which is Rise of the Thorns. And I tend to be a more suicidal support in the sense that I'm like, okay, well, if I die, but my AD carry gets their AD carry, that's a big win. And if we get both of them, that's even a bigger win. And you often do yourself a favor by drawing a lot of the focus fire onto yourself as a support if you can survive it for more than a couple seconds. So now, I'm not really certain Zyra has the capability to survive too much, so you're going to have to use some defensive masteries, build some defensive items, but once she does go down, she has that added bonus of doing some true damage on the back end, that Rise of the Thorns. It's essentially like having a Kog'Maw as support, but 10 times better because she actually has decent CC and can do stuff while alive without having massive amounts of farm. So certainly will help out in the laning phase, and as you get into later game, especially if people cluster up You can hit a lot of people with that Rise of the Thorns, and that's certainly something to bring to the table, especially if you're a support and you're kind of the suicidal support. You just like run in there, use your ultimate, put down some plants, and if they focus you, they're going to get a little bit of true damage on the back end. Should help turn the tide of the fight a little bit your way.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, she tends to be a little squishy, and that can be one of the negatives about her, because if you aren't careful, you could get caught out. I mean, you have a lot of CC. You can use your thorns to snare people if they get too close, but if you aren't careful, you could get bursted down easily in bot lane, especially against some of the popular champions in bot lane right now. I think Leona is actually seeing a lot more use. There's champions like Ezreal, Graves, and Corki who have a ton of burst, and those are the 3 most popular AD carries right now. So, I mean, Zyra, if she isn't careful, could get bursted down, and if you don't manage to get any damage onto them while you're dead, I mean, Rise of the Thorns isn't going to help much. So, I mean, is that what the passive is called?
Rise of Thorns.
Rise of Thorns, yes, okay. Just making sure. But yeah, so you just have to play a little bit careful, maybe take some defensive masteries and stuff like that. But as long as you can stay safe, I mean, there are other champions who are very viable, such as Sona, who are quite squishy and who are poke-based champions. So she can be used for that CC and for that poke in lane, and can provide a lot of CC and utility in team fights as well.
Yeah, I mean, Sona brings you a lot of auras to your team, which is really nice, but the big thing that makes Sona shine over a lot of the other supports right now is the fact that she has that AoE CC. But Zyra has, a pretty similar one with Grasping Roots, except it's on a 12-second cooldown, and I believe it has longer range than Sona's ultimate. So obviously it's not going to catch the same width of people, but if you can land it properly and get 2 people tied up there, that is going to be a great lead-in for a lot of burst.
Yep, so Zyra, definitely a champion that you might want to try out in the support role. I think we've pretty much exhausted that topic. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Alright, so now we move on to a related topic, maybe in theme, although not exactly in the gameplay, and that is about the jungle. And this is something that we talked about a couple weeks ago, actually, but we've had some technical difficulties. I've been moving around, so we're going to actually do this in full this time and, do it right. So we have, the numbers, we have everything put together, so we're going to bring you this content right now. So. And when we're talking about the jungle, we really are talking about the early game jungle. As everybody knows, the small camps spawn at 140, and the big camps spawn at 155. And what happens is, a lot of times, people don't take these camps as they spawn. They, maybe the jungler takes like wolves or wraiths at 140 and then moves on to a big camp, either blue or red, at 155, and that's all that happens. But these other camps, such as small golems, such as the wolves or wraiths, depending on which one the jungler starts out with, they also spawn too, and there can be an argument made that you should take those as well right when they spawn.
Yeah, and that is the argument we are going to make. It's not something necessarily groundbreaking, as a lot of professional teams have started dabbling in this and trying to use all of the resources as quickly as possible. Because just for a brief rundown, there's 348 gold or thereabout worth of creep kills in your jungle immediately after they spawn. So 155, if everything is killed, you make 348 gold, which is more than a kill, obviously. Likewise, I mean, there's the same amount of gold on the other side, so you don't really have to be constrained to your own jungle. You can also try to take portions of the enemy jungle, but there's also over 1,000 worth of experience in the jungle, and it only takes 280 experience to get to level 2. So essentially that means most of the people on your team could get a really quick level 2. It doesn't always work out that way, but in essence you really can get a lot of experience straight off the bat that a lot of teams, and especially anyone in solo queue, anyone who's not really doing ranked 5s, I suppose, is probably just neglecting that, neglecting all of that opportunity that they could have for trying to get ahead early on. And we've seen this from professional teams, and we've seen it from particular players, but in top lane, obviously getting that level 2 can be a really big thing, and I remember Dyrus being really confused as to why Voyboy kept on beating him. He would always hit level 2 first, and it was because he was taking his own wolves or taking his own double golems. So certainly it's a really good strategy. Oftentimes, you can do it if you have help from the pool. You're not going to lose too much life, but even if you do have to use a potion, it's certainly going to be worthwhile, because if you're going to use the potion, you're going to come out of it with extra gold and extra experience. So I think we've kind of talked about the benefits, but how exactly is the best way to work this out? Do you want to go ahead with that, Brian?
Well, it really depends, I would say. I mean, mainly, first, for example, on the jungler. If you have a red start jungler, you're obviously going to have a jungler who goes from raise to red, and those go to the jungler. And now you have all of these other all of these other jungle camps that you might want to clear, which are the wolves, the blue, and the small wolves. Now, you could have the well, depending on which side you are on. Let's say you are on the purple side, then you're going to have the blue on the bottom. And so that means your duo lane can maybe take the wolves when they spawn, while the jungler goes for the wraiths. And now, if, for example, and that's one example, and if it's switched, if the jungler is a blue first jungler, then you might have maybe, I don't know, the mid and top laner go for the wraiths. So it really depends on really what your champions are and where you start with your jungler. So, for example, I know if you are on purple side and you have a top Nunu, Nunu can just take those double golems by himself, and I mean, that's not a big deal for him. So Nunu can take the double golems by himself. The other people can focus on the other camps. So I mean, depending on what you want to do, I mean, Nunu actually works really well because he has that consume to help take those jungle camps quicker. But I mean, like, you really want to work with who you have and try to figure out the best way. So I mean, I gave a couple examples, but I mean, do you have any other strategies and tips for taking those jungle camps earlier?
Oh, absolutely. I have like a pocket full of them. I have many. There's certainly things we've seen. Moscow 5, for instance, essentially allowed their Urgot to take blue buff at one point, was helped out by his Alistar support, while red buff was being taken. So I think they went wolves, then blue buff, which gave Urgot obviously level 2 and gave him blue buff, and then he went on to 1v2, and I forget which event this was. But it was a very notable strategy. But if you do that, you're obviously depriving your jungler of potential experience, so he has to have a plan of where to go from there. So certainly, ward up beforehand if you know that you're going to give up a big camp. And I think, a lot of times it makes sense to give up blue buff to your AP middle, to your bottom, to your top, because it'll give them extra experience and it can really help them dominate the lane. But if you are going to do that, have a plan as to where you can next go for the extra experience, and normally that means the opposing jungle.
Yeah,
and what we see.
Oh, sorry. No, I believe in that game that you were mentioning with M5, what they did is they gave Urgot blue, and then Alistar went with the jungler. I forgot who the jungler was now. I think it was like Lee Sin. Yeah, I think it was Lee Sin. And they went to the enemy red, and they took the enemy red, they killed the enemy jungler, and I mean, that's where they got their other experience from the enemy jungle and from killing the enemy jungler.
And a huge lead, and giving Urgot the ability to 1v2 because he had that blue buff. He could keep spamming his shields, his Qs, his E's, Noxian Corrosive Charge, or whatever it is. So that's certainly like a big advantage. Another really easy thing you can do is give the blue buff to your middle, and especially if they are someone like a Morgana or a Cassiopeia, someone who can push the lane, well, suddenly you can force their middle to be, to farm underneath the turret, and then you kind of create a catch-22 for them, wherein your jungler, obviously, who donated that blue buff, is going to head into the other jungle. And now you, as the middle with blue buff, should be quicker and more able to respond to any sort of aggression in the jungle, because you're not going to lose out on as much CS, and you have that blue buff. Likely the opposing AP middle is either running out of mana trying to spam and get kills underneath the turrets, because a lot of mages can't do it very well early on, or they've taken damage, because obviously you can pretty much spam your spells as much as you want to with that blue buff early in the game. So that's another strategy where, give it to someone and then, be aggressive in a place where they can respond to very quickly. For instance, and this is how it generally plays out, blue side, middle takes blue, and then they will then go from their bottom to the opposing red, from blue side to the opposing purple side red, and just count on the AP middle being able to keep so much pressure on middle that no one from the enemy side is going to go ahead and assist in the jungle. Or if they are going to assist, then you just back out, and suddenly that person who left their mid turret with minions being killed on it loses out on a lot of experience and a lot of creep kills. So that's kind of the choice you make people make. There is certainly some other strategies, and worth noting is the soloing a big buff creep, which I love seeing, and there are a couple champions that really excel at this. Gangplank's decent at it. Basically, any jungler who you can send top lane can instead, just try to solo a big, like the red buff, for instance, or blue buff. They can try to solo it on their own, and this may or may not work out. Obviously, you're going to be in danger if you're doing the enemy's buffs, but most people do not expect that to be happening. So if you can get there really early on, make sure you're not caught out by any wards. You may have a free buff, and obviously you're going to have to go to the buff that their enemy team is not going to. And this really helps out if you have like a very aggressive level 1 team where the enemy team is going to be afraid, not going to be spread out, and not going to be roaming all around their jungle. So that's certainly another thing you can do. And the whole point is taking as much off the map as you possibly can straight away, because there's all that gold, there's all that experience, and the more you can put into your pocket is the less the other team is going to have, and you're really going to be able to get off to a nice early start. Certainly there are downsides in the sense that you can get caught out in the enemy jungle. If you take it from your own jungle and he goes to counter jungle, he can be caught out. But in general, it's worth the risk, because I think people underestimate how much gold and how much experience is just waiting for them in the jungle.
Yeah, and really, the early advantage is not something that you should kind of write off, because, it might not seem like that much gold overall, but getting all that experience and that gold earlier on is going to help your team a lot more. You might be able to reach level 2 faster, and level 2 is when a lot of champions get some combos going, especially in the... there's a lot of champions that have those level 2 combos, like Jarvan, Leona, that's the basic kill lane, but there are plenty of other champions that, and a lot of champions also get their escapes at level 2. So, that can really keep you safe. If you hit level 2 before the jungler can gank you, that can help you get away faster and really, preserve a kill for the other team. So, really, it can help you a lot to reach level 2 before the enemy does, and getting that one additional level earlier on can even help you get a kill on them, because you can maybe jump on them and kill them with maybe the help of a jungler or somebody else to actually get a kill early on as well. So it's really just trying to get those resources earlier on, get a really early lead, however slight it might be, to try to snowball that into a bigger lead and eventually win the game, of course. Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to mention, you talked about maybe giving your blue buff to your mid or to your top or even to bot in the case of something like Urgot, but you could also consider giving the red buff to your mid, because there are plenty of champions that would benefit at mid at having red buff over the blue buff. Yeah, so do you want to talk about that?
Oh, well, I was just going to say anyone with a ranged attack. I don't really have I haven't put that much thought into the potential of mid having it, but if you put it on a solo lane, we tend to see it, top or bottom. If there's a lane swap, give your bruiser that red buff. It just makes a world of difference. And if you pick it up straight away, you tend to hit level 4 while still having that red buff. So that is, 3 extra levels of domination of your lane, where the opposing person can't really even step up and try to trade with you. So I suspect it's kind of similar in middle, especially if you're a melee or going against a melee champion as a ranged attack AP carry. That would be really, really big. Did you have anything else in mind there?
No, it's just, it doesn't necessarily have to be that the middle has to get blue and the top or bottom has to get red. You can just move those buffs around depending on where these champions are as well. So, because other lanes can also benefit from those buffs as well.
Yeah, there's another thing. Blue side has, been a very popular pick. Well, I guess it is, obviously the first pick, so it's very popular in that sense, and has had a really high winning percentage in, more recent tournaments. And in large part, that's because they get the first pick. They also have the double golems that their bottom lane can do. And as purple side, you can challenge those double golems, but that puts you in the enemy's jungle and puts you in a kind of a bad situation. You don't have turrets to retreat to. Really, it takes a lot more effort to counter those double golems than it does to take them. So that's a big advantage blue side has. But if you're purple side, and we see this more and more, consider swapping up towards top, because then suddenly you're support and AD can take the double golems as well and go into the lane. And if you feel like you have a better matchup for that, then certainly it's worthwhile, because blue side's not getting any sort of advantage early on from those double golems, and potentially the opposition will not be prepared for that, and you can make them want to switch, and you can try to make them switch at inopportune times wherein they'll miss out on CS or on experience.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, really, you don't even have to keep the lanes constant. I said you don't have to keep the blue buff on mid and the red buff on someone else, but I mean, you can change things around as you see fit. And we even saw some people switch so that the dual lane goes mid. So I mean, you could do that as well if you find that more beneficial for taking buffs or taking those camps. So yeah, I mean, that's basically all I have to say on this.
Yeah, that's about it. I mean, just to reiterate again, there's a lot of gold and a lot of experience in the jungle. You should try to make as most out of it as you can. I mean, it's not that long ago. It's like a year ago when people wouldn't even take the smaller camps before blue buff, and like that was kind of unheard of. You would go ahead and do that, or Garzman Bob had an Udyr route wherein he would take the wolves, wraiths, double golems, teleport back, then do wolves, blue buff, and so on and so forth. So skipping out those big camps. And I'm not a big proponent of skipping out on camps, especially nowadays when you can get really good leashes from your mid, top, or bottom. So you certainly want to take advantage of those leashes, because that's also extra money that you don't have to spend on potions on, and it turns into extra money and experience because you can spend longer in the jungle or go in for that earlier gank. But there is certainly the issue, and I'll just touch on this briefly, sending to middle. Just very quickly, it seems to benefit purple side a little bit more if you can, force them to, respond to that. If you have two people send middle, your support and AD, and you can send your AP down bottom, and presumably or preferably they're an AP that can farm from range. Generally, you want a bruiser, someone really tanky with a lot of range, to farm 2v1 so they don't get dove, and so they can pick up some CS. But Gragas, for instance, is probably a champion that could do it better than most, just because of the range on his barrels, his relative tankiness. But if you are doing that from purple side, you have the advantage of your AP will be closer to blue buff. Whereas, if you tried to do, swap the AP towards top lane as blue side, of course, that would be beneficial to you, but you can't really do it vice versa. You can't have purple, AP going top and blue AP going bottom, because they'll be so far away from the blue buff. And most APs rely on that, obviously not the resourceless ones, but anyone besides that, it is one note to keep in mind. Just try to swap up your lanes, but keep in mind what advantages and disadvantages they have.
Yep. And one last thing that I want to mention is that you should really, when you do this, you should communicate with your teammates, because I mean, if the jungler is going for his route and you take his red buff, he's gonna be like, wait, what's going on? And he might rage or quit or something like that. But yeah, just communicate with your teammates, and I mean, you should just let them know that if you want to try this, I mean, if they really don't want you to take their jungle, then you probably shouldn't, because it can cause a lot of problems in games. But if you're playing with friends, or if they agree to it, then really taking that early experience and that early gold can really help you a lot early. And I really feel like that early advantage shouldn't be understated, because that early experience is worth so much to you in lane that I think it can really be, you can basically almost decide the game from that.
Yeah, I mean the game is very snowbally, and I think you're trying to point out that early money is worth a lot more than later money because if you get those first couple of big items, if you suddenly get a Doran's ring or Doran's blade up on the opposition, well, suddenly that's a good chunk of health, good chunk of damage, good chunk of regeneration that you have on the opposition, and where certain plays might make sense or might make a difference later on in the game in team fights. Items are really, really big early on, and of course, then you just build into those bigger and bigger items that much faster, and it kind of has a snowball effect. And a lot of people don't like League of Legends because there is that snowball effect, but we're here to try to take advantage of that as much as possible.
Yep. So, I mean, that's how the game is played, and that is how we will play the game. So, that is our segment on the jungle. I think that is all we have for today. So, thank you for listening, and we will be back hopefully next week. Are we gonna? I think we might do a special episode next week.
We really should.
Because we're gonna have Sotir and me in the same room, if you know what I mean. But anyway, but yeah, so we are probably going to have a special episode. There are going to be the World Championships going on, so tune in then. And thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.